I recently posted my interview with Kenji Lopez-Alt. It was really fun to talk about our cooking philosophy and the food industry. But as you've noticed from that video, we didn't really get to many of your cooking questions. So that's what this video is for. You took the time to write to me, and I want to take the time to answer. I might not get to every single question, but I'll do my best. Here is a question from Disc 33. Can we get a quick tour of your fridge? Absolutely! Let's go. I'll show you my fridge. Just to give you a heads up, I did not pretty up my fridge for this, so, you know, this is the reality. Don't judge my fridge and I won't judge yours. Okay, so the top shelf right here is where all sorts of top bottles live, like milk and cream, the boxed tomatoes if I have some left over. There is a whole bunch of jars of yogurt here. Here's some yogurt. It's basically dairy. All right. Now this shelf has eggs and a box for leafy greens. At the moment it is empty because I'm at the end of my shopping cycle, so there's nothing in this right now, but I will probably go shopping in a couple of days and refill this with kale and Swiss chard and all sorts of leafy greens. So at the moment I have a lot of space in my fridge, which is nice. There is a pot of stock here. That happens only once a month, just ignore that. And some containers here and there. All right, now this drawer is my meat and fish drawer. And right now it's empty. We'll be eating vegetarian for a few days. This drawer is the veggie drawer. When this is empty, that's when I know I need to go shopping, because as long as I have some vegetables, I always have some pantry items on hand, like bulgur, quinoa, pasta, canned tuna that I can always whip up a meal. So until we use up all these veggies, I'm not going shopping. And I still have a ton. I have kusa squash, and I have beets, and a fun little cabbage that I got at the farm. It's a cone cabbage here. And what else is there? Oh, broccoli. So, and I think I have a few cucumbers too. So once I use this up, that's when I'll go shopping. I tried to get this drawer only down to the bare essentials of carrots and celery. As long as we have food, there's no reason to go shopping, because otherwise you end up wasting food. And the bottom drawer is fruit. At the moment I'm very low on fruit. I'm down to one apple. So the only thing I have here are the essentials, which is lemons and limes. So those I always try to keep on hand. If my fridge ever runs out of citrus, that's not good. That means I really need to go shopping. So the top of the door is the butter section. I always have some butter here and some butter in the freezer if I run out of this one. This is my cheese area. I have some cheddar. I usually get Cabot, a seriously sharp cheddar at Costco, and I cut it up and vacuum seal. So I have little pieces of it instead of one huge block. There's some Parmesan cheese here. I think I might have some Manchego lying around. So if I ever need a cheese, this is where it is. This is also my place to store vegetables and fruit that have been started. Like I have a little bit of red onion, a little bit of ginger that I already started, and I don't want them to get lost in the vegetable drawer. So I want fast and easy access to them. I want them to be in my face so that I use them up. And I usually have a started lemon or lime here. Not at the moment, but this is where it would go. Next shelf down is the bottles. So cooking white wine, cooking red wine, a little bit of cassis, because I really like my kir. Of course, the grilling glaze, right? Can't live without it. And the soy syrup. Couple of mustards, basic Dijon and grainy. And a few jams. I have a fig and apricot at the moment. And down here there's sake, mayo, sesame oil. I try to keep the oils on the door. The reason I keep them in the fridge is because they go rancid. And it takes, unlike olive oil, which I go through in just a couple of weeks, it takes me like a year to work through a bottle of sesame oil. And I don't want it to spoil, so I keep it here. But the door of your fridge will be a little bit warmer than the rest of your fridge, and so your oil will not solidify as much. It will warm up to room temperature and become fluid faster. And here I have some maple syrup. Yeah, maple syrup lasts very long in the fridge, but spoils very quickly otherwise. And that's everything. We can take a look at my freezer too, though the freezer is not nearly as interesting. We mostly have a lot of butter and nuts. So here's a bunch of butter, there's my yeast, sesame seeds, pine nuts, walnuts. I have gazillion nuts. I see almonds here on the door. I store all my nuts in the freezer so they don't go rancid. Some frozen peas in case of emergency. The bottom is all sorts of flours, whole wheat flour, rye flour. All of those go rancid too quickly, so I keep it in the freezer. There's a little piece of salmon there that I'm gonna use to make poke bowls. I usually freeze it to use later in the week. And duck fat. Also, there's a little jar of fat, discard fat. I call it dump fat. Like if you're trying to get rid of fat, you can pour it down the drains. So I pour it into this jar, keep it in the freezer. On the trash day, I can toss it in the trash. And the door of the freezer for me primarily just has a whole bunch of ice packs. It's helpful for when you're shopping, buying fish, things like that. Here's a question from Barb Kaffelmouth. Can anything be cooked with the beautiful carrot greens? Thanks. Okay, so carrot greens and the greens from many other vegetables can be turned into pesto. You know, instead of basil, use carrot greens. And another thing you could do is puree them in a blender with some heavy cream, but to make sure your heavy cream doesn't turn into whipped cream and then butter, you might need to heat up your heavy cream a little because warm cream does not whip. And the only thing is how good that will taste will depend on how bitter your carrot greens are. The less bitter they are, of course, the better it will taste. And there is no way to know that. You might need to taste them and see for yourself. And don't forget the salt. Salt tames bitterness, so, you know, salt it generously to make sure that it does taste good. All right, next question is from Steve Timko. I need to reduce sodium intake. What are some workarounds for roast chicken, making brisket, etc.? All right, so I used to think that there is no substitute for salt, but I was wrong. When we talk about salt in the culinary world, we are always talking about sodium chloride, but there are other salts like potassium chloride. Potassium chloride tastes salty to us. It tastes just like salt. The only thing is, to some people it's slightly bitter, so you can get this product called low salt. Look it up, it's sold at Whole Foods, sold online, and low salt combines something like 2/3 of potassium chloride with 1/3 of sodium chloride. So this will reduce your sodium intake tremendously. The only thing is you should definitely talk to your doctor before you try this, because whether or not it will work for you will depend on why you can't have sodium. If it's blood pressure, then potassium chloride is usually great because potassium lowers blood pressure. But if you can't have sodium because of certain kidney disease or some other health issues, then you might not be able to have potassium chloride either. So talk to your doctor, but it is definitely an option to consider, and it does taste salty in something like roast chicken. Tastes just like salt. All right, next question is from Lucas. Is there a reason to rinse rice submerged in a bowl instead of just rinsing in a strainer? So I think it depends on the rice. Something like basmati rice or jasmine rice, sure. If you're talking sushi rice can be very starchy on the outside. It's very polished and it's very sticky, and there you really want to remove a lot of starch. Now, whether this will make a difference to you, I don't know. Because, you know, everybody has their level of stickiness that they're willing to tolerate. You know, I used to wash my rice kind of lazily, just once, submerged in water, but not mushing it with hands, not rinsing it out a couple of times. And then I had my Japanese instructor's sushi rice, and Yeah, it was nicer. And the big difference is that she washes it very thoroughly. She covers it with water and agitates it with her hands to really release the starch, and then dumps the water. So if you just put your rice in a strainer and run some water through it, it is not going to remove quite as much starch. It will remove some, but not as much. If you're worried about dumping all that rice into the sink, because people who cook a lot of rice, I find, can very carefully take their rice cooker and pour this water out without dumping the rice. And with some practice, I learned to do that. But in the early days, that was a little hard for me. I always felt like some rice is going to fall in the sink. Then when you're pouring the water, hold a strainer or something underneath to catch the rice that might fall out. It will not take up any more dishes. You're already talking about using a strainer. It will just take a little bit more time because you need to fill that rice cooker with water and really agitate the rice. But, you know, try it. If you cannot taste the difference, then don't bother. It's not a biggie. And also sushi rice is different too. So maybe for your rice, it's not that important. Okay. Now here's one from Hunga Buna Bunga. When making crème brûlée, why do we have to heat the cream before baking it? I don't use vanilla bean, just the extract, in case you're going to say it's for the vanilla bean to infuse the cream. So I don't think you have to heat the cream before making crème brûlée. You're right, it's probably just for the vanilla bean to infuse the cream. I actually Googled around a little bit and watched Chef John from Food Wishes make crème brûlée without heating the cream, and nobody died. Everybody was fine. So, you know, when we make a quiche, we don't preheat the custard. We just combine eggs and cream and dump it in and bake it. So I think that's perfectly fine. The only thing I would warn you about is make sure that you whisk the sugar with the eggs for a while, just to make sure the sugar can dissolve somewhat and everything becomes a cohesive, even mixture. All right. Next question is from Joe Muscatel. Is there any point in flavoring the oil you use to fry meat after having cooked it sous vide? Will any of the flavor transfer to the meat? And I have a related question. They don't sound related, but they are related. This one is from Mr. Bojangles. You seem to disagree. He's talking about Kenji and me disagreeing on the best method for making pesto. Helen uses a food processor and Kenji uses a mortar and pestle. Okay, so both of these questions are about the aroma, about smell. So there are several different things that impact your eating experience. One is texture, one is taste. Taste is very limiting. You can only taste 5 things. Remember, salt, sweet, acidic, bitter, and umami. And most of the stuff that you guys call flavor, right, is smell. Humans can smell thousands and thousands of things. Smell is also very individual from one person to another. Smell is usually what makes people like or dislike an ingredient. And some people have very strong sense of smell and some don't. So, you know, a lot of things, a lot of tips and things that people tell you have to do, like add garlic and herbs when you are searing meat after sous vide, or make sure you're pounding that pesto in mortar and pestle because it's more flavorful. What they mean is it's more aromatic. Okay, and so it's also a little bit questionable for me personally whether it's more aromatic to the people eating it eventually in the dining room at the table, or it's more aromatic for the cook. I have a feeling that the primary benefit here is the aroma for the cook. If you're searing that steak and you threw in some thyme and garlic cloves into that skillet, oh sure, the whole thing is gonna smell very good to you. How much of that will be noticeable to the people eating? Well, maybe if you poured all that oil or butter in which you were searing on top of your steak or meat, and any sort of meat, you know, maybe that would be somewhat noticeable to them. But in a blind taste test, I don't know what a huge difference it makes. So if it makes you happy, you're searing that steak and there's that sizzling garlic and thyme in that skillet, go for it. If you don't have garlic or thyme and you don't have time or don't want to spend effort dealing with it, I think that's totally fine. I mean, most of what you're affecting is your personal cooking experience, and that's an important thing. We want to make the cook happy, just like we want to make the people eating the food happy. Same with making pesto with mortar and pestle. You know, if it brings you joy to like smoosh it with mortar and pestle, yes, the process of making it will be more aromatic for you. But if you don't have time and you don't want to deal with that, that's perfectly fine too. So this part is very individual, and just to show you how ridiculously subjective the smell is, just, you know, think about the crap written on wine bottles to tell you what the wine is like. You know, this one is crisp and has an apricot-y finish, and that one has ripe cherries. You know, what is ripe cherries to one person smells like barnyard to another person, right? So there's certain things in cooking that are not very subjective, like texture. Texture you can test without putting anything in your mouth, right? You can just break it up with your hands and see how tough or soft something is. So when people say this makes your burger more crumbly or this makes your burger more snappy, you know, we're actually talking about the same thing. That is somewhat objective. But when people are talking about this is more flavorful than that, you know, it is a little bit like that wine BS. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, because I love wine and I have done lots of wine tasting classes and have participated in so many wine groups. So I am all for wine. I love wine, but I also feel that it is a somewhat subjective experience, what exactly you're smelling in the wine. And the same with cooking. All right, so that's all the questions I have for today. Keep cooking, stay curious, and I'll see you next time. And here are more thought-provoking culinary videos for you to check out. And if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.